Hi there, guys. My name is Lane Anderson, and for my DVAP project, I decided to do the rhetoric of the national populist. And so, just as a starter, what are the definitions for populism and what is the definition for nationalism? So, populism is basically described as a political approach. It divides society into two camps: the pure people, which is usually the majority of a population, versus the corrupt elite, which is like politicians and high figures. Um, but there are more than one way society can be divided into these two camps. So there's theocratic populism, which is a majority religion versus a minority religion, um, or ethnopopulism, which is placing one, um, the majority of an ethnic group against a minority of another ethnic group. Populism isn't limited to the left or right axis of a political compass, but it is very enigmatic for politicians as a tactic because it garners a lot of support for their campaigns, especially when citizens are frustrated with problems that they are feeling like they are unaddressed by current government. And then nationalism is a definition of an ideological movement or figure that champions a specific culture, usually their own, places it above every other country's like wants and sovereignty. They really emphasize domestic industries over foreign trades and relations, focuses on their cultural and ethnic identity, keeping it pure, keeping a strong history, and it may come off as an unreasonable devotion to it, um, at the point of belittling the history um, and the people of another nation. And then this is also an ideology that can be left or right, but it is primarily used by right leaning parties. So, what is the nationalist populist formula? So basically, it involves an angry public, a public that is angry with an incapable government that is unable for some reason to solve their problems. Sometimes, they're too slow to respond, or when they do respond, it doesn't seem sufficient enough for the scenario. And so when, you have citizens paying their government to, help support them, as you do with taxes, it leaves citizens asking why they pay their taxes. And so it basically primes the public against their current governing body. They're suspicious. And so prime public and then plus this nationalist populist figure, they harness the fear of the other, which is a defined but faceless entity responsible for all these problems in a society. So basically, it's just like the name of a group, like the Turks or the Polish. You know their name, you know where they're from, like one or two aspects about them, but you don't know their face, you don't know who they are. You just know these things about them and relate them to this bad statistic, this or that. And so, you harness this fear for the other. Um, this other not only creates all the problems but benefits off all these problems in society. When you combine these two things, the prime public goes out there and votes that nationalist populist figure into office, and then you get a really big landslide victory usually, or a very clear cut victory at least. And so, what are the results of this? So the results, when a populist gets voted into power, they may start undoing the powers of both the judicial and or the legislative. They continue to accrue power around the populist figure, and they continue to act as the voice of the people while simultaneously making their executive role so untouchable by forces of democratic process. So, in other words, they're making an autocracy based on, acting as this figure that speaks for the people, basically cutting out what they would describe as the middleman of the legislative and the judicial and political parties. So you can have that one-on-one, quote unquote, relationship with a politician. And so to see the populist formula in action, I decided to draw from um, President Trump, and later on you will see the kind of rhetoric he uses. But before we get into that, I wanted to do a little question sheet, something you can use when spotting populist rhetoric out in the wild. So Does the product advertisement person directly or indirectly discuss a problem within society and mention a certain group or structure, and label them as the cause and also label them as the other? Step two, does the matter also directly or indirectly mention a figure or a movement that could put a stop to um, this problem group and liberate the majority pure people from their bad doings? And then finally, this step is optional, but is the advertisement's rhetoric emotionally moving enough that it would be appealing to a demographic it wishes to target? This one's optional just because I know that sometimes emotion isn't something that is always appealed to for some people. Some people don't have a hard time connecting to it. So if you just see those step one, step two, you are usually seeing a piece of populist rhetoric. And most populist rhetoric you will see is very indirect. It kind of subconsciously plants some seeds into the mind of the viewer, and it inches them towards what the populace wants them to think in such a way where it's like, yeah, you were already born into that thought before the populist even mentioned it, if that makes sense. So just to start off, these are kind of some of the slogans I picked from President Trump that I would say are pretty populist. So keep America great. Um, it kind of goes under the assumption that, America is threatened from being great. There's a threat that keeps America from being great. By voting for him, you're going to be keeping America great. Yeehaw. Take America back. This one is a little bit more like threatening. It feels like, there is a problem group out there that is trying to take America away from the majority of voters, from the people, and the way to get it back is to vote for Trump. And then finally, the one I think is most concerning is never surrender. So this basically says that, this other group has taken kind of America, its people hostage. And, you should never surrender to these people. You should continue to fight against them, which kind of continues this poll where the public feels so afraid of this other group that they lean more into Trump because they see him as a fighting figure that's going to save him from this other that is a threat to them. And so another good way we can really see this rhetoric is in his merchandise. The first one, there's two I really enjoy. I'm going to skim over the other two as best as I can. But this one, Make America Great Again, the first piece of merch, kind of sets the foundation. Make America Great Again is under the assumption that something has kept America from being great, or America was great at one time and then stopped. But it's already kind of promoting a problem, if that makes sense. There is something that keeps America from being great. And that is something that the people need to be keeping in mind going forward. It's that little seed that there is a problem. It's not who is the problem or what is the problem, but there is a problem. And as a campaign manager for Trump, I want the people to know that there's a problem. I want to put that into the mind of my viewer. So the next one up is these two books, Under Siege and Save America. Both of these, they say don't judge a book by its cover, but in this case, we are absolutely doing that here, guys. So Under Siege already kind of assumes that America is under attack by some force. And, Trump's son in this situation is writing about, how, like, that experience. And so you could be asking, well, this could just be about Trump's family under scrutiny as Trump being the president. And, I'd like to draw your attention to one, the American flag in the background here, and then my family's fight to save our nation. So it is clearly something about the nation. The nation is under siege from something, and it's Trump's fight against this other group that has done the country wrong. Moving on to Save America. So, Save America from what? There is an other that is being implied, and the only way to, get saved is to, support the guy on the cover. And some interesting details about this one is that I feel like it invokes imagery of the Iwo Jima Memorial, in the sense that there are people like these FBI agents. Once this photo moves, I'll show you guys. Um, they're kind of leaning on top of him, kind of like how they're pushing the soldiers at Iwo Jima are pushing the flag up, and Trump is kind of like the flag in this case, where he's standing kind of tall and proud as the soldiers push the flag up, and then there's a kind of a direct line you can make between his fist and the American flag, and then speaking of his fist, the fist is another popular symbol of populism. With the fist, you're punching up against those elite figures, which is reinforcing how Trump is speaking for the people, and he's been punching up against the elites who have done America wrong. And so the next piece of merch is Fear Not. This Fear Not t-shirt for $38. There isn't too much, I would say, about this one, other than, of course, we see that populist kind of fist symbol again, but then the tagline, Fear Not. And, what is there to fear that makes the t-shirt say, Fear Not? What is the force that people should be fearing that warrants this kind of language? And so it's already placing into the mind of the viewer that there is something to be feared. And the only way to not fear it is to support Trump, buy this t-shirt, vote for him, support his policies, because he will save you from this force that you're meant to fear. And then this one is another very similar one, Fight, 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 from the Amazon storefront. You can see down here, if I zoomed in, which I'm not going to, but this is the approved website of the official Amazon Trump storefront. It was recognized as that in 2018. But basically, this sign says Fight, 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 and you have to ask the question, what are they fighting against? And that's the thing, it's always this idea that there's this other that you're supposed to be fighting against, and Trump is going to help you fight off that force, this force that has ruined the American way of life, and all these sort of things that, make the other side seem like a threat and make people come like further into kind of Trump's ideology. It makes it look more and more and more appealing. And so finally, this next one is kind of like my favorite. It's the most interesting. It's not my favorite. I wouldn't say any of these are my favorite, but this is the FAFO hat. And so FAFO stands for F around, find out. So to put it simply, F around is meant to be addressing, this other group that has been doing America wrong, that has been doing all these things to disturb the lives of the majority of Americans, or the majority of Americans Trump think exists, his voters, the people who support him, how, these elites F around and find out by, getting sent out of office or kind of being punished, if you vote for someone that has been effing around, quote unquote, you find out when the Trump voters kind of take a stand against you, and unleash all these policies that they know that you don't like, or that the Democrats or liberals don't like, and they vote all of their kind of people out of power, and then they, that's their find out. That's kind of like the revenge they're taking on this, other group that has done America wrong for so long. Ideologically, of course, none of this is based in any sort of reality. This is just kind of based in the perspective of being kind of like a Trump supporter. And another figure we could say used a lot of kind of rhetoric like this in some sense was Adolf Hitler. He was appointed as Chancellor of Germany in 1933, became Führer about a year later with the death of President Hindenburg. Had plenty of support in the Nazi Party and wider population due to championing values of unifying and creating a greater Germany, so expanding territory, reclaiming their spot as an empire, hint, hint. Anyways. and renegotiating the deal of the Treaty of Versailles, which had put all the cost of war onto Germany and resultingly left Germany in an economic lurch, especially with the Great Depression. Or yeah, and so basically, Adolf Hitler pushed most of the problems in Germany um, onto the other European countries, but also accused the Jewish population of betraying the German people during World War One, basically stabbing them in the back. And then some stories even accusing the Jewish people of puppeteering the whole entire war in the first place to gain power at the cost of Germany and all of the German citizens. Um, Adolf Hitler was already preying on um, the strong sentiments of anti-Semitism already in his community. He just happened to, include it in with the rest of his political drabble, which kind of just helped fuel the fire for him. And so moving on, we are taking a look at his posters because he does not have much merchandise, not that I know of, really. And this is going to be just a quick reminder of, what we're going to be looking out for. So, does it discuss a problem? Does it blame it on a certain group? Does the matter also say that there is a figure that can put a stop to all of it and punish those guys? And then, is it emotionally moving? So let's get into these posters, guys. So the first poster is the Marshal and the Private fight with us for peace and equality. So, they fight with us against, they fight for us, for peace and equality. Who would fight against the German people for peace and equality? It's already kind of setting out that there is a problem out there, that there's a problem group that is preventing Germany from being a peaceful, country. And so, it's already establishing the other, and that, Germany and Germany, Hitler, and the Marshal are all unified on one front together as one populist front against that. Which leads into our second poster here, Our Last Hope, Hitler. This one, very similar in the sense that, Hitler is kind of self-aggrandizing himself as for the people. He's going to solve all the people's problems. And it shows a little bit less of like, there is an other. It's our last hope. It could be the last hope for anything. But, it can be an implication for the economic state of Germany, or our last hope against, the Jewish population, which has dragged us down, or the European countries, which have saddled us with so much debt. And our only way out is to elect someone like Hitler who will speak for us and solve all these problems. And so the second kind of set of posters, Greater Germany, yeah. Comparing that with Make America Great Again, we're saying great and great again. We don't want to say that America is becoming Nazi Germany, in a sense, but they both want to be great, and they want to be great for similar reasons. They both want to have a big accruement of power, but at the cost of other countries. They're placing their country's worth above the sovereignty and the wants of every other country. They just do whatever they want because it's America first, everyone else last. And it is incredibly popular to some people. And so the second one more leans back into aspects of populism, unlike the other one, which focuses a bit more on nationalism, which is Victory over Versailles. So victory, of course, insinuates that there is a loss on one side. When you claim victory over someone has to be the loser. And so it's reestablishing the other, but it's also establishing that the Nazi Party can solve all of these problems by changing the Treaty of Versailles and breaking the chains that have held down Germany, who has been victimized by so many groups for so long, seemingly. And finally, our last poster, and I think this one is my favorite, and not just because it has an English translation, so no one has to think that I'm lying about my translations here. We farmers are mucking it out. So, a quick diversion into something kind of known as farming exceptionalism. It's basically kind of like viewing farmers as this, you know, this group that is so enriched in tradition and honesty, a hard day's work man. They are the heartland. They are something so importantly special to the development of so many countries, and what they do for countries is so important that they are seen as these very, you know, um, kind of martyr figures, if that makes sense. That's probably a bad word for it, but these figures that do the hard work to provide for others. And so, you have this establishment of a noble guy, and he's throwing the muck out. And what is the muck? It's people like the Jewish community. It's people like the Europeans and the Americans and the Soviets. And they're treated as trash that, you see how they're so hostile towards him, that have caused problems for this farmer, this noble farmer, for far too long, and he's finally throwing it away by voting for Hitler and the Nazi Party. And so, with all of this being said, what is the solution to populist rhetoric? How do you get past populist rhetoric instead of just continuing to always poke holes through everything you see? To just it's more than just looking around you and seeing these things. It's about finding a way to divert it. And so, there is no solution for frustrations with a government that may be slow or inefficient. But the answer obviously isn't to blame groups of any kind. And as simple as it may seem, as mundane as it may seem, the best way to unravel populism is to allow for the opinions of all to be shared, as it fundamentally pokes a hole through the idea that the majority of people, this pure people that the populist, relies on, that the populist gives themselves to, acts as the voice of, the majority of people all want different things. And there is no truth that they always want the same thing. They have different wants, and they have different ways they wish to have things, problems addressed. And so when you allow for that free opinion to be shared, it breaks down those walls of this, us against them. And it's more about, what can we do as a collective to implement a policy all of us can like, both minorities and majorities, where, no one has to feel like they have to be silenced. And, the votes that you cast are ones based on your wants and desires, and not based on the wants and desires of a collective that you may not know. I hope you guys like my project. I know it's a little messy, but I had a lot of fun. And thank you to the Trump store and the Trump Amazon front. You guys did not ruin my search results for the next 2 to 3 years at all.